Okay, so why do a video review of Kafka's The Trial? Well, I think in general, Kafka, even though he's been so talked about and everybody's heard the term Kafkaesque, it's hard to overstate just how much of an effect he's had on, um, especially media and culture. I see his influence in a lot of television shows still, a ton of books, a ton of especially speculative fiction, all over science fiction. Um, Obviously, there was the Orson Welles film. What was it? The early '60s, I think. So you know, even though he's had his due and it's been acknowledged how much of an effect he's had, I just think it's still somehow underrated. And the reason I also wanted to do a review was that I noticed like, a lot of the things that stood out to me. I'm sure someone's written an entire paper on them or acknowledge them in some way, but for the most part, I hear people bring up the same few things when they talk about this book in particular, The Trial, which is like, all the bureaucracy and the dreamlike quality and the trial itself, and all of those things are important. They stand out when you read it, but I think there's all these other things that kind of caught my eye that I don't hear brought up as much, so I wanted to make a video partially because of those things. And I did something I don't normally do, which I wish I would always do, which is I made like pretty extensive voice notes as I read my way through the book. So yeah, I wish it, like I said, I wish I did that on every book because then it'd be so much easier to kind of gather your thoughts and do a review of it. Um, but in this case, I'm glad I did. So initially, one of the things I wanted to start off with is that the book opens on has a great opening line, right? It's basically it's saying that someone must have been spreading lies about Joseph K, the protagonist, because one morning he was arrested, right? And even though he didn't do anything apparently, and so it starts on this kind of big opening, like this inciting incident that kicks off the story. Is already happening in the first sentence, right? So it's which is really it doesn't waste time in that sense. Um, it also starts relatively in a kind of straightforward way. The sort of weird dreamlike quality of the book, the sort of paranoid feel of it. Um, in the first few pages, it eases you in because you don't notice it right away. It's fairly straightforward. Oh, maybe this guy's been falsely accused. Is there some sort of mystery here? And then it gets more and more strange as it goes on, and especially when we approach the actual trial and its proceedings, and the more we learn about it. Um, so one of the big things that stood out that you notice right away is the odd way that women are portrayed in the book, and the odd way that Joseph K, the main character, interacts with them. I mean, it's like every woman in the book behaves weird. I don't, and again, it raises this question of like, what was Kafka just this huge like incel that had all these problems with women? Maybe it's possible. Is he doing like a Nabokov thing where he's kind of showing you the story, and you kind of have to question everything, and there's this unreliable sort of narrator, and we're seeing through the eyes of this monster? It's possible. Which is another weird thing. I heard a lot of people say because of the situation he's in that this character is sympathetic, and I don't really get that. There's clearly parts in the book where he very purposely, I mean, doesn't try to hide it. He's clearly exposing this guy as a hypocrite, as a hypocrite, as someone who cares about status more than posterity or all these things. Like I don't know. It's more than morals. He's more worried about how he'll appear, and has very demeaning thoughts about other people, certainly about women. A lot of the women, I guess, behave in a crazy way in the story, but it's like I'm not sure that we're even dealing with a reliable narrator here. So, yeah, it's definitely weird, but it's just something that right away you notice because in I think it's the first chapter, he ends up in this young woman's um, room because it kind of connects to his, kind of share this door or whatever, or she lives across the hall or something, and then all these men from his work are like in her room when the cops show up to arrest him, which he doesn't go with them. It's sort of this weird moment. I'll get to that in a second, but later on when he's talking to the girl, it's you kind of think, oh, he doesn't want her to get the wrong impression or be whatever, and you think he has the best of intentions for a second, and then you kind of realize that I want to say he like forces. I can't remember exactly. It's been a minute, but I think he like forces a kiss on this girl, and it's really odd and weird. And then he seemingly has this line where um, he's really pleased with himself, and it's almost like he wishes he had gone even further, but he doesn't make it clear like be even more forceful with this young woman in her apartment or be more inappropriate. It's unclear what he means by it, but it's clearly kind of a weird, creepy line, and his behavior is clearly inappropriate. Um, I don't know. And then also he's more worried about like the way he'll appear to other people than again like his actual actions, whether they're right or wrong. So it's definitely weird. Um, Another thing is, you know, when the police show up and they're kind of saying that he's done this crime or he's been accused of one, and certainly one of the big things in the book is like no one will tell him what he did, and they just say don't take it too seriously. They have this attitude where they sort of and this leans into the whole dreamlike paranoid feel of the book, where when he tries to get answers like what am I being accused of, why, who said it, it's like a lot of people pacify him with a lot of politeness and kindness. Not the police don't; they're pretty rough and accusatory, um, which feeds into the ending of the book, which I won't spoil. At least not right now. I'll give you a warning if I'm going to at the very end of the video. Um, but for the most part, everybody within the court system and things like that he meets always kind of pacify him by being like, "Oh, don't take anything too seriously. It's fine," you know, almost like, "Oh, this is normal," even though on some level he's accused of some crime even though he doesn't know what it is. So things really get strange when he goes to the first part of the trial. There's this recurring thing where all of the it's like the court system is all in the attics of these tenement buildings. I don't What he's trying to say with that is lost on me. It just feeds into the absurdism of this whole part of the book. But then there's a later part where he's visiting this court painter, Titorelli, which I'll talk about later. Um, and then he realizes like the back door of this guy's apartment goes into the court buildings, and then this guy's studio or painter studio apartment, whatever, is actually just like one of the court buildings in some attic that they like lend out to him or let him use. There's this other weird thing when he walks up to the building at first. There's these kids playing outside, and he has this thought, and he says, "Oh, I'll either need to bring some candy next time to win them over, or a cane to beat them with." And it's unclear A, why he cares, and then B, it's interesting because he's acknowledging on some level that there will be a next time. Like this is not, even though he's saying, "Oh, I'm innocent. This is BS. I'm gonna get this thrown out." He clearly like doesn't really believe it because he knows there's going to be a next time. He admits it before he even walks in the building. That's kind of interesting. I'm gonna shuffle the note cards again. This is when all kinds of weird things start happening. There, like the judge's books like stacked up near his where he's sitting. I don't know if it's his big this desk or if they're in the official courtroom yet. I can't remember, but it's like they're all erotica. It's like basically pornographic comics and stuff. For whatever reason, it's just kind of a throwaway, but I thought that was weird. And then there's this washerwoman who is like the wife of this clerk at the court, and yet she's like sleeping with this law student, and there's this whole little thing about that going on in the background. It's not exactly clear why. Again, it was lost on me if it was. Maybe it was a statement on like on nepotism, or it was just a commentary on his feelings on women and how they're fickle and whatever. Again, it's not clear whether or not he's this sexist prick. He certainly acts like one in the book, and women all behave erratically in this book. Almost every woman, very few, and they also kind of fall into these archetypes of like, there's like it's a little bit like mother, maid, and crone kind of thing, and there's like women all behave essentially like any young woman behaves like an actual whore in this book, like he basically calls him that outright in different ways, and even very very young women, like kids basically, and it's super weird and creepy. Which, like, I guess it gives me that Nabokov thought, which kind of calls into something I never hear. Was like, is this guy really innocent in the first place? I don't know, because he goes out of his way to make him seem like kind of a menace. I don't. Again, people can, on one hand, he could be going out of his way to make him seem bad, and also he could be this, incel and have all these thoughts about women that he wanted to put in the book. I don't know. But there is a whole thing with that. And then there's this weird thing where when he's inside the building, the longer he's inside this building, he just gets sick and ill. And kind of like later when he's inside of the court painter's room, he's getting like overheated and hot and feeling bad. And then the people that work there feel fine. But then when he leaves later, he instantaneously goes back to feeling good. And then all the people that were inside feeling good feel sick when they go outside into the fresh air. It's kind of an interesting little part. But yeah, so another thing, so there's this one of the funniest parts of the book is that, and this again, there's this universal kind of thing where these strange bureaucratic nonsense, loopholes and this repetitive, endless cycle of nonsense could be applied to like the church and the clergy, or a political system, a court system in a literal sense, some ecclesiastical, like I said, meaning, or you could apply it to like a modern healthcare system in America, and it would feel very resonant if anybody's navigated that nonsense. It could be applied to all these things, and I think if you've gone through something like this, you understand, like political refugees, people like that. There's all kinds of things where there's this ridiculous part where the lawyers, and this makes me think of ecclesiastical, but the lawyers cannot get access to the courts, and the court officials get so annoyed, so they just stand at the top of the staircase where the door is to enter, and the lawyers run up one at a time, and the court official grabs them and literally throws them down the stairs, and all the other lawyers like make a little, thing with their arms and catch him, and then the next person goes up until finally he's so tired or distracted that one of them is able to sneak by the court official, which is obviously played for humor, and it's like ridiculous and absurd, but also does feel like a very, like, the way it's written, it almost makes me think of like these pastors trying to contact like a god or this sort of system of angels, whatever, that don't want to be contacted, and occasionally one slips through, but just the way he wrote it, there's obviously a lot of like, especially with the stuff at the end, the court painter, there's a lot of stuff that's purposely kind of making a call to religion, and this part feels like that especially. So yeah, they almost seem like priests making an appeal to God, or either that or the opposite. Like the court is the clergy and the praying people or the lawyer. It could be, you could look at it different ways. And then it kind of reminds me of this story that a lot of, I don't know if this is true, but this is a story that Kafka's either relatives or neighbors who lived like really close to him in this probably tenement building basically would hear him cracking up during the time he was writing the trial. Like it would be late at night and he'd stay up writing, and he would just be like almost crying, laughing. And this feels like if there was a part, so clearly like he meant for it to be funny, like, and this is one of those parts that I'm sure he was like making himself laugh writing it because it's ridiculous. So it could just be for the sake of humor. Not everything has to have this deeper meaning, whether you want to read into it or not. There's this part where he basically says, he's trying to think, and he's like, how could anyone ever figure out what they've even been accused of, right? So, you'd have to literally go through every single memory of every single thing that's ever happened to you since birth. And he basically says, that's ridiculous. That's no way. It's almost impossible, and also like that's nothing. Why would a young person want to spend their time, doing that? But then he says, if you were older, then it'd be a suitable occupation for a mind turn. He said the way he words it is great. He says it would be a suitable occupation for a mind turned childish to while away the lengthening days, which is just really dark, actually, and kind of sad. But yeah, I don't know. There's a part where he meets up. there's this whole insane part with this lawyer. There's like a friend of his uncle's, and he goes over there, but it becomes clear there's just these ridiculous characters. Like where within a few moments of meeting this girl, Lenny, I think her name was, Lainey, I can't remember. Um, he basically has sex with her in the first few literal moments, while like his relative and the lawyer and other people are in the other room. And then it comes out later that after he has sex with her, he clearly has like very little interest in her. And then comes out later that like even they had this jealousy because she liked this kind of oafish character that he looked down on Block. Um, the lawyer says, oh, she has a sexual attraction to men who are accused of something, like men who are on trial. So that's just a whole other weird, ridiculous. Like her character behaves so weird and so crazy. Um, I don't know. It's just an odd part of the book. Could mean 100 things, but there's a lot you could read into it. Um, and also with that lawyer part, it's like eventually he drops the lawyer because that his uncle recommended, and it goes out of his way. The Kafka goes out of his way to kind of point out his hypocrisy again, where like he looks at Block. He has this kind of mean line where he's like, "Oh, it was easy to talk to Block." You know, he's like, it's like talking to he says like, a person not as smart as you in a foreign country. Like you can just drop the conversation anytime. So it's just like this really shitty thing to say, kind of offhandedly that he's thinking. And then later he actually like pretends at least to respect Block because he realizes Block has been in the situation he's in, but for much longer. And so all of a sudden, like he's totally changes up his tune. You know, he thinks he's this buffoon before, and then sleeps with this woman that he was with and whatever. But also like after he's like, hey, how dare you? How dare she look down on him or whatever? So it's ridiculous. And then he goes to see this court painter later on. The chapter is super weird. He shows up and there's like this. A lot of the female characters also have like deformities and stuff and odd little physical descriptions that are kind of glazed over. It's weird. But basically, there's like, all these like children that live with this weird court painter or like outside his room. I don't. This part gets weird, but basically, he goes in there and the court painter tells him like, oh, there's a lot here, but basically this weird kind of court painter works for the courts and does all these, the paintings of the judges, and therefore can kind of like intercede a little bit on Kay's behalf and say like, hey, he goes on this long spiel about how there's either a deferment and then two kinds of acquittal. One is like a true acquittal, which you can't actually get. It's almost like a legend. No one's actually gotten one. And there's this line where it's basically like, only the highest judge can acquit, and he's so far out of reach for all of us. Even our courts are out of reach of this court, thankfully. It seems like he's talking about God there. It seems like a very like obvious religious reference, but and then also he goes out of his way to say like point out the contradictions in the law, where he's like basically there's like what the law says and then what I've actually witnessed. This is the court painter Titorelli talking. And he says, like, yeah, technically the law says, a judge can't be bribed, but they can. And then it says, oh, well, there can be a total acquittal, but I've never seen one. So it's like, again, what the law says and what actually happens. And it's just so endlessly convoluted. Again, throughout that chapter, too, Kay comes off like kind of a jerk. But, and there's all these weird things, again, with the children that, like, live outside this guy's room that are kind of prying. With this whole thing where like people have to like walk over this court painter's bed to get to the court, because he turns in the end you realize it's like part of the court building. It's like every attic is like in every tenement building is like a part of the court system somehow, and people have to literally step on and walk over his bed, which is like this artist being in bed with the court system. Is like this whole it could be. And then also the court painter is like an appointed position. So like his dad, no one else could do it because there's all this arbitrary nonsense. And basically it has to be passed down. Like his dad was the court painter and his dad before him. So he kind of serves as this, like, instead of this artist like critiquing or using art to like critique or improve the system or bring something to light. Instead, he gives these people false hope and then basically... he gives these people this false hope that just goes nowhere, when in reality he just serves the interests of the state. He doesn't. it doesn't really improve anything. Then basically the last thing kind of wanted to hit on, and this is like the spoiler warning, right? I'm not going to get too spoilery, but the last chapter, the last few pages are tonally very different and it's like an abrupt shift. And again, last spoiler warning, but this is one I will say though before the spoilers is like this is one of those books where I could tell you all this stuff and it wouldn't ruin the experience. Like I don't. If anything, it'll just make you more aware as you're reading to like kind of take note of things. It wouldn't. It wouldn't really. I don't know. It just wouldn't. It's one of those things where knowing what happens wouldn't. You with like the movie Shutter Island, me telling you the big twist or something, or some Shyamalan movie might ruin the movie, or at least a bunch of the enjoyment, the big reveal or whatever. But in this, the ending is very abrupt, and like I said, tonally it's very different. All of a sudden, it's less dreamlike and strange and more very abrupt and very cold. And the trial's been kind of in an impasse. And all of a sudden, these cops show up in the middle of the night, drag him out of his home, bring him to this abandoned area, and set him on his knees and shoot him and kill him. And he's executed. And as he's executed, on top of everything, there's this sort of dehumanizing, embarrassing moment, and he has this. His final thought is basically like that his shame will outlive him, right? Like he thinks, oh well, it'll just be over. At least I'll just be whatever. You know what? Bring it on. Let me just escape all this and die. And it's like no, even in death, there's this like final insult that will outlive you. Like the insult and the shame will outlive. You're like, I don't know. It's very sobering all of a sudden. So, it's a very powerful ending, a very memorable ending. And like I said, pretty abrupt, but I think kind of perfect. So, yeah, I'd recommend this book to anybody. I think it's there's obviously some weird stuff in there with like the female characters, and there's so much strange stuff in there, and that's part of what is the appeal of it. But also, I could see parts of it being a turnoff to certain people. I don't know what to think about a lot of this. Like when you're reading it, it gets your brain turning, kind of gets the wheels turning, and gets a rise out of you, and different people have so many different thoughts on it, and like I said, it has this universal appeal in the sense that like you could apply it to all these other things in life, and it makes a lot of sense, but so I don't know, it's very easy to read, it's quick. It's got a great film adaptation. I guess some people care about that too. I think it's a pretty good adaptation, the Orson Welles one. But overall, yeah, check it out. It's I think you'll notice its influence after you read it in so many different pieces of media. I can name names, but there's so many, like especially in television, so many shows that feel very Kafka-esque, right? So definitely one that's on the must-read list.